as we enter into the sacred space of listening and receiving, I invite you to join me in this short induction ceremony in order to be fully open, receptive, and aligned with the information that is for your highest good in this conversation today. Begin by closing your eyes and taking a deep breath into the belly. And as you're breathing, bring your awareness into your heart center, making contact with the light in your heart. And find your heart light glowing, growing and expanding out around your chest. And now bring that light of your heart up through your crown center, through the top of the head, extending up all the way above you into central sun, making contact with the heart energy of central sun. And then bring that powerful energy down through the ethers into the crown of your head, down through your body, and into your heart center, expanding and joining with the light in your heart, and continuing down to the base of your spine, extending down all the way down into the center of the earth, making contact with the heart center of Mother Earth. And now bring that nurturing energy up through the layers of the earth, carrying liquid crystal plasma through roots up into the base of your spine, and then spreading into every cell of your body, moving into the heart center, joining with the light from above and joining with the light of your heart, creating a holy trinity of light within you, and then spreading out around you, holding space for your highest good, your highest awakening, and the opening to receive the divine downloads, encodements, activations, and light codes that are perfect for you at this time. Breathe that in deeply into your belly, allowing yourself to expand in this energy and opening to step in to the container of receiving. Welcome to the Alchemy of Ascension Season 6, Exploring Expanded States of Consciousness. I'm your host, Waxéla Sananda, and today I get to introduce you to Lori Ann Spagna. Welcome, Lori.
Hi, Waxela. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you and to have this conversation. I've been really looking forward to this. I have known your work for a while. You are a well-known face in the world of ascension and metaphysics and energy healing and DNA and all of these topics that we're fascinated by. So I would love for you to just begin by sharing about who you are in your own words and just some words about your work and what you do in the world.
Yeah, well, I just give a little, I guess I'll just give a little story background, which is that I started, out of college, I was just like, I was really lost. And I got into corporate America, and just because that was sort of like the thing to do. And I spent almost 20 years in corporate America out of college. I was miserable. I was dying a slow death. And I had accumulated all these really unhealthy behavioral patterns, excessive drinking, smoking, just on and on, eating excessively, spending excessively, pharmaceutical drugs from doctors who, that was their method. Like, I developed that over 20 years in corporate America. And then what happened was my brother died of a drug overdose. And I very quickly started getting messages from him. And that he was like my wake up call. But even during those 20 years, I would cry myself to like sleep every night, cry. Like I was so miserable and so many things were going wrong in my life. So when the wake up call from my brother happened and I started tuning in, like took me about a year just to sort of unpack that and to get the core message was like, you're on the same path I am. Like, why don't you just change your ways? So I quit corporate America and became a dog trainer. And then I started getting messages from the dogs and I could hear them. It wasn't even anything. It just started. And they were saying, we're going to teach you how, you listen to us and we'll teach you. And within a year of that, like my husband thought I was crazy. He divorced me. So I moved to Maui. I lived there for 2 years and I started getting into all the esoteric practices. I was meditating every night. I was working with these incredible masters. I was getting all, into the healing arts. And I had a first contact experience while in Maui. So that was pretty transformational. I literally was, like, for lack of a better word, beamed on ship, teletransported on ship. And I have a very good memory of that, especially through, a lot of hypnosis regression, but definitely like it was in my knowing that it happened even the very next morning when I started to recover from like the almost trauma of it. But it was overall, that was like, I recognized that as my future star family and a part of me that came back from the future to braid in with who I am now. So that's kind of really out there, but not so much for this community, right? And that's where it really all started changing for me. Right before that, there was a near-death experience, but it wasn't like in a traditional sense. It was through meditative state, because I was working with this master from the Himalayan mountains who spent his life like in the Himalayas, learning ancient practices. And he would teach us how to still our energy and our mind and our emotions, our body in totality, so that we could just become present and conscious. And through working with him, I had what he would call a little death, where my reality, my awareness stayed, but all of physicality was gone. So those were transformational experiences. After those 2 years in Maui, like everything changed. I was no longer who I was, so all of those old patterns and behaviors were gone. Like 6 figures in credit card debt was gone within 2 years, 65 pounds of like excess body weight. I healed my thyroid. My hair was falling out at that time. That was over. All the alcohol, all the cigarettes, all the unhealthy eating, like all that stuff was gone. So, and then I, pretty much started my career from there. So now, flash forward, I'm just sharing this kind of work with others and still staying on my journey, really dedicated. And I consider myself to be a person who truly does serve the light and is here serving the light and what I call God's plan of lighted creation. So I do that through channeling to really facilitate people and animals awakening to align with their divinity. I facilitate DNA activations. And I work a lot with the animal kingdom and their consciousness. And I love channeling. I love bringing in information and energy and consciousness from the non-physical to help us to understand, and then to really anchor that into our bodies and beings to help people up-level their core vibration and to learn how to live in the core of their being and experience life in this new paradigm way of existing. So I hope that in a nutshell.
Yeah. There's so many things I want to follow up on in that. So you mentioned when you went into the ship, I have a parallel in that I also lost my brother when he was young, and I lived in Hawaii in my 20s. So, but you went into the ship and you said you kind of braided in your future galactic family. Does that mean you had a walk-in experience, a braided walk-in experience?
Yeah, I tend to call it, I do call myself a braided starseed. That is my languaging. I, over the years, was told you could use the word walk-in, but I feel like I wouldn't identify as a walk-in because the way I define a walk-in is that the old soul who, owned that body, the physical body, has completely left. of their own will for one reason or another, and the new soul, that is the star being, took over. Whereas for me, that old soul who was me, that is me still. That is the versions of me that made it to that point are still the memory, the knowing, the identification, that's still there. So I don't identify as a separate being. I just identify as unified with that future version of self that has integrated more fully and completely with the past self. So that's why I refer to braiding.
Yeah, that's the braid, right? It's
Yeah.
rather than just leaving, you brought in another aspect.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah. And do you like, is there anything else that you can tell us about that experience? And, like, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience because, wow, that's powerful that you went on a ship. But also, because we're exploring like the ways to get to those states, was there something that helped you expand into the ability to do that, to have that experience?
Yeah. So, so I'll address both of those questions. First, I'll address the second one first. What helped me to expand into that was I had already gotten my Reiki master, which to me was my entry level into the healing arts. And I was developing my gifts as, a healer. And I was practicing, as I had mentioned, with this teacher who lived in the Himalayas. And so he would teach us to meditate through the night, and he would teach us how to prepare for what he called this little death, so that we could drop our identification with the physical world. So there was a lot of prep that got me there. I was meditating through the night every night, for nights on end on the golf course. And of course, I was doing all this massive energy clearing, Reiki. Becoming a Reiki master changed my life in the sense that I rarely use Reiki for healing anymore. But what it did for me personally was it cleared me out. It detoxed me from everything that I believed was true in the physical world, right? Or that I perceived to be real. And, you go through a period of time there where you really think you're losing your mind. You really think you're going insane because I'm saying you, but this happens to those of us, right? I was accelerating I was transforming at such an accelerated pace. So all of that was prep work. There was, a lot of meditation, a lot of healing, a lot of cleansing, spiritual cleansing, a lot of detox, and a lot of dedication and discipleship, and I mean, that was like my whole life for those 2 years. That was the prep work, I think. But what happened on that night, to bring us more to the second part of your question, was that I was meditating on the golf course in Maui, where I lived in Pukalani, and, was not a sleeping state. I was sitting up on my back porch. And so, every once in a while, there's times where you just like open your eyes and, oh, you're back in this physical, world. And on this one night, I saw this light ship, and I did at that time, this is all like pre-2011, this is like in the first, years when I started becoming aware of ETs. I didn't know a lot then. So I had this sort of delusion state that they were all here to help us, which hasn't been the truth. But anyway, at that time, so I wanted to meet them. I had it in my mind, So I saw this light ship, and it was moving in a circular motion, very low to the ground. It was not like a satellite that moves slowly across, and it was definitely not a star, and it was not an airplane either, because like I said, it was moving in circular motions for a long period of time. And also it was probably somewhere around 2:00 in the morning. And at that time, while I was living in Maui, there was no overhead planes at that time. The airports closed at like 9 or 11 o'clock maybe. So there was nothing there. So anyway, I just focused on it for a while, and I was already doing telepathy, and I just asked if there's any way I can be of service. Please let me know, because I was so focused on service. Like that was my core mission at that time. I was really heart-centered on service, and also very focused on the desire to be love, to really demonstrate love in myself and in my world. So anyway, at that point, it was so radical. Something that it's almost like I couldn't describe it, but it just transitioned me onto that ship. And suddenly I was in a very altered state, suddenly and yet not suddenly. It's what I describe now as a plasma-like state, because it is altered state, dimension, light, non-physical, not physical, and yet physical. And I was in a room and there were lots of beings around me. And at first, all of these beings looked very human. It took a while before, I guess what I was getting was like downloads of consciousness before they revealed more of who they were. And there were many different species. And again, some of this is through unpacking it over the years, but there were insectoids, there were definitely Palladians, there were Arcturians, there was intergalactic beings, lots of beings. And at that time, I would not have been able to identify, oh, that's a Palladian. The insectoid person was the one that I remember freaked me out the most. But in any case, they're all there and observing. There was a lot of energy movement. At some point, I remember being like, I want to get up from here, because there was that whole thing that looks like a massage table, like that experience of being on the massage table and watching these beings around me. And I remember saying, I want to get up from here immediately. Like all I had to do was like ask for what I wanted. I want to move from this room. I want to get out of this room. The door opened. I remember walking down a hall. I remember seeing, a room that had all kinds of camera equipment. The being in there was a beautiful, now what I identify as Palladian, beautiful, tall, like gorgeous male figure, male, blonde, blue eyes, like beautiful. And I remember like wanting to stay there and yet feeling compelled to move on. I remember going down a hallway and then these doors opened and I walked through there and there was like a stadium. And I came into the stadium and I asked, what is this for? Like, what is this? And the woman there who represented first as a human and later insectoid, that was freaky. That's when I decided I wanted to go. But she was like, well, this is where we put our children. This is where all of our children go. Do you want to go in there? And I was like, no. That's when I realized she wasn't human. I was like, I want to go home. She said, okay, no problem. But can we put this in you? They put in, with my wrist. That was the part that angered me the most. The next day, I was like, I could feel the implant. But I gave her my wrist and she put an implant. And I remember telepathically receiving that, it's good that I didn't want to go in there because I was one of their children, you see? So she was glad that I didn't want to go there and that I was identifying that my home was in the bed at home or back at home in my house. So for her, that was a sign, I guess, like that's part of the unpacking of it, because in the moment, I don't think I knew that. But anyway, I was free to go. And after that, I remember looking in the mirror. There was a mirror in the room where I started. I saw myself and I was like, I really want to go home now. And that was fine. Then they said this way, the doors opened, and then boom, I was teletransported back into my house. And that was it. I was just, freaked. After that, I'll say this too. There were weeks that went by where I was very angry because I felt like how did that happen? Like, I didn't know that was what was going to happen. I didn't like that this implant was in me. And I was very angry because I was like, what is all of this stuff they were like what you call downloads, right? All this information, what is it? What is it for? And like, what is this about? And all I would keep getting told was, you'll know when the time comes. You'll know when the time comes. And now I do. I mean, for the last close to 20 years now, I know what that means. I get it. It was like my DNA was being activated, all these gifts of consciousness, all of these tools and abilities, and they've continued to develop and be enhanced, but that's what all that was.
Wow, fascinating. And I've got memories showing up as you're talking too.
You're getting memories?
Yeah. I mean, I've had some experiences. I'm like, oh yeah.
Right. A lot of times that's how it works, right? It triggers, it triggers that.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you ever find out what the wrist implant was? what that was for?
I had it removed multiple times, like, because I wasn't confident the first time. But I was always told, don't tell anybody, you don't need to know. Like, because the people who did the removals were always saying things like, yeah, that might have been negative. And it was in the early days.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't, because now I understand there wasn't always, it wasn't all just light agenda. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, that's how it has played out. And that's because that even in those early days of Maui, where I was really waking up to my gifts, I mean, I had a lot of, at first it was like, I'll use this word, dead family members were just coming, like in droves. All my dead family members, like, were coming to me, tell her this, tell her that, tell this one that. And I mean, it's just so mind blowing. And then I had a lot of shadow beings in the early days come too. And I'd be like, not interested, not interested. So, your gifts start opening up and everything is available for a while until you choose your path.
Yeah.
And my path was always, I'm only interested in the light. So with the whole implant removal, it was like, okay, just not interested in a sense. It's not that I sweep that stuff, sweep it under the carpet or deny it or hide it in the closet. I think that's impossible to do as a healer. If you really want to be a healer, if you really want to serve the light, you have to be willing, in my opinion, to really face the shadow aspects, trauma, upset, dark stuff that exists, and not be afraid of it and have no resistance to it. So I already had developed like non-resistance. I was just choosing my path,
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for unpacking that. I always find those types of experiences fascinating. And I've had some of my own, but those are for a different.
I want to hear about yours.
Yeah, another show. I have shared. But interestingly, my very first contact experience, I was very young, only 3 years old, and there was an insectoid present, which naturally freaked me out.
Yeah.
And also, like, I was left with a program: don't tell the adults, they won't understand. So
right.
I had to get over that when I became an adult. So I do want to move into, you said a big part of your path is the animal communication, animal consciousness, and animal ascension, which I find really powerful. I don't have anyone else speaking about that. And I'd like to hear more about how you work with animals, and even just the concept that animals are interested in evolving their consciousness is very interesting. So I'd love to hear you unpack that.
Yeah, well, the animals are here with a divine mission and purpose, and their divine mission purpose, and this is all, contracts, and you can learn about this through even the Akashic records. They're really here to assist humans. So a major part of what they do is they embody the energies and the frequencies that we're learning to embody. So for example, animals don't have to learn to forgive. They have that energy within them. There's some animals that are not utilizing it. For example, pigs, they're not utilizing it on purpose to help humans learn about grudges and boundaries. But they all have different purposes, right? So they embody these energies. Another great example, they embody the energy of, I'm looking for something, the word M, it starts with an M, where is it? It's like the ability to love the unlovable. What is that word? Magnanimity. Thank you. So they have magnanimity, for example. They can love the unlovable. They can love all regardless. So that's another energy that they're embodying, right? So all of the animals have this. Now, the other thing is that they haven't lost their connection with consciousness in the way that we have. So when I say lost their connection with consciousness, what do I mean? If I say the word Australia, you and I both have an image, an understanding, all kinds of information, all kinds of knowledge of what Australia means. And yet we weren't thinking about it prior to the moment that we said that word. And so we have this telepathic knowing, and we have awareness of, for example, Australia. We can name any other thing that is common to human consciousness. Animals have this too. So they have it even more consciously in a way, like they have awareness but they're not thinking about it. They're not analyzing it. They're not considering it because they don't need to. But if they needed to at any moment to facilitate awakening for their human or for a geographical region or for a set of humans, for example, they could easily call upon some form of consciousness or awareness that they have. And in general, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Yeah, and it's part of how they practice telepathy, because it's like they can just use an image, and an image for them carries a whole lot of information, or they can just use an awareness of something and it carries a whole lot of information and energy. And then when you think about animals in their human environment, right, who are pets, what we call pets or companion animals, they're there specifically to assist that human work on whatever areas that human may not be consciously aware of. So for example, in a human dynamic, a pet who is highly aggressive could be revealing to the human the aggression in that household, even if it's suppressed aggression. Or they could be, an animal in a household could be revealing fear. So like, for example, my last animal, whose name was Kiko, she was very afraid of humans. And I didn't get this until like her transition period, that the reason she was done, I mean, of course I didn't want her to leave. She was saying is like, our primary job together was to free ourselves of the fear of humans. And we did that together. I never even realized it in a conscious way until she told me at the end of her life that I was carrying this. You know, a lot of starseeds have that, you know, this fear of humans. Now, my new animal, I called in this animal, I wanted to fall in love with all of humans, not just the ones who are conscious, not just humanity as a collective. And she loves all humans, right? This is part of what we're working on together. So to bring that full circle, the animals who live with humans are typically working on something specifically with the humans that they're assigned to. And they're naturally healers, empaths, and intuitives. They don't have to learn this. They have this already developed in them because they're not, you know, busy trying to pay their bills and, you know, get along with their mother-in-law or whatever, right? They just have this, it's innate within them. So they're here helping us. And if I refer, I'll just take one more minute on this, is that, you know, if I refer to some of the collectives like cows, they believe themselves to be the best mothers. They're teaching us how to mother ourselves, how to parent ourselves. They're teaching us about self-love, self-care. And we may not realize that that's one of their primary missions, but it is. And when we start tapping into their consciousness, whales and dolphins are very well known in the spiritual communities, right? They hold the records of the waters. They're helping to heal the waters, to raise the vibration of the waters. Elephants are keepers of the records of the lands. So they have the true history of Earth and our lands, and they store up history from the ancient, right, extinct so-called mammals of the past. And they have the records of that. So when you learn to telepathically communicate, they have just so much information to share. And history for us, because we, of course, we are realizing that the history that we've learned is not accurate. The history that we've been taught is not accurate. So the animals won't lie to you. They might play with you, especially, you know, like geckos, or some animals are very like little trickster. They might play with us, but not the ones that are here really to help us really learn truths, such as elephants, whales, dolphins. You know, they have these truths stored up for us. So
Well,
that's they're our teachers. Yeah, please.
A question on that. When, you know, you're talking about cows and pigs, how do they feel about humanity using them as a food source?
It's a brilliant question, right? I mean, I've asked it a gazillion times. So cows, typically, their biggest gripe is what we do first to their babies, calves. That's like for them, they have done so many things to try to teach us. For example, mad cow disease was where they collectively decided to self-sabotage to get us to stop doing to them. And when they realized that wasn't working. There's all kinds of things they've done over the years. The tornadoes that the West has, not the West, the Midwest has, is often cleanup of the horrendous things that are done in the factory farms. Tornadoes is a reflection of the consciousness of cows combining with Mother Earth to say, this is not okay. Clean up your act. So cows that's their number one gripe, is what we do to their babies. Their number two gripe is the way we treat them, especially in, the force that we've used to force fertilize, force them to get pregnant, force impregnation. The way they are treated is, so they say, if you're going to eat us, at the very least, treat us well. And this has gotten into the collective more and more, because of course there's more and more grass-fed, and they are always like celebrate that. Pigs, to answer that part of your question, are carrying the energy of grudge and resentment on purpose, which is why in many cases the food known as bacon or other forms of pig can sometimes be associated with carcinogens, because they're saying it is against our free will for you to eat us. I never ever eat pig. I don't eat cows. I almost don't eat almost any animals ever. But in pigs is one of those things where they're saying, we want you to learn our free will. So we're carrying the energy of grudge and resentment to impart this upon you. It's not really the nicest thing, but they're very, very smart. They're brilliant. I once had this conversation with this pig in Maui, and I forgot how telepathic I was and he was. I was just in love with this pig, and then my thoughts went off like to the side, like, oh, how could people eat you? And no, he took off. We're done. We're not having this conversation anymore. You tell people it's not okay with us.
Yeah.
So I could go on. I'll just say the one last thing about fish. Fish are really interesting, because when you ask them how they feel about being eaten. And I've not asked factory farm fish. I've only asked real fish, like at the top of waters where I could see them, and they're like, well, we eat each other.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have that perspective before I asked.
Yeah, I had actually, I was vegan when I was pregnant with my daughter, and my midwife said, and I was in Hawaii. I was in Kauai at the time. My midwife said, you have to start eating fish for your baby. And I didn't feel good about it. And then I went swimming, and when you're pregnant, you just pop up like a buoy, and I looked, and fish, like a very large fish, was following me. I'm like, I think that's a tuna. And like there were several behind it. I'm like, and I tried to like swim away, and it kept following him, like, oh, it has a message. And I tuned in to like the fish mind, and I said, what's the message? And they're like, it's okay, you can eat us. And so ever since that time, I've eaten fish, because I feel like I got direct permission from fish.
Yeah. It has really a lot to do with more like the respect and the honor. And the ancient, the shamans knew this, and older tribal energy knew this. It does have a lot to do with the respect and the honor, the process. Still, I don't eat land animals. I will have fish. I live in Florida, but I for those same kind of reasons. But I get it. The big movement here is to recognize them as sentient beings who are worthy. That's really their will for themselves, that they be recognized as sentient beings, worthy and deserving of respect and honor, dignity, love, kindness, and compassion, just as we are worthy of that. And as we are waking up as a human species, recognizing that we're worthy, deserving of love and compassion just because we exist. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to be approved of. We don't have to make $1 bazillion to do it or to be it. We just have to know that we are worthy and deserving of all love, honor, respect, dignity, kindness, compassion, and that we extend that to one another. That is what the animals want for themselves and for us. And that is what we are learning, I believe, on Earth right now. And that is, to me, that's like the ultimate lesson, just to know you're worthy and deserving because you exist. You're lovable because you exist, because you were created by the divine, that we are the emanation, we are the frequency of the love of the divine that is emanating itself from itself to reveal itself as us, as individuations of itself. And the way we reflect through all the light and color, sound, and vibration that we are, that is love, right? And we're the only ones who perceive ourselves through our free will, through our beliefs and our energy and our vibration as something separate and potentially less than that. But we are not less than that. And that's part of this ascension journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Yeah.
So moving forward, I know you have a large body of work on DNA, and I'm just going to read this because I want to get it right. You said something about what lies beyond the first 12 strands of DNA, up to 444 potential strands of unawakened DNA. And I'm like, oh, I have to ask you about that. 444 strands of unawakened DNA. How do we tap into that? How do we use that? What is that all about?
Well, let me first say, I think we could potentially have unlimited strands of DNA. It's up to us, but we're just not there yet, right? Because everything's ultimately unlimited. Unlimited resource is available to us as we align with our source, and unlimited potential exists as we develop and align with that, the unlimited potential of all that is. But that said, I think when I was saying up to 444, it's what I was getting at that time, because almost all my information is just channeled, you know, is that we have access to align with that potential now in physical form. What it is that our first two strands, we already know this, right? So basic. Our first two strands are our genetics and our ancestral lineage. And when we talk about our ancestral lineage, we're talking about the storylines that we took on from our ancestors. And I see most of that, not all of it, but most of it, as basically corrupted in the collective of humans, because it's, you know, it's got stories of disease and lack, limitation, and, you know, poverty and aloneness, loneliness, you know, isolation, deprivation, etc. And all those stories, they need to be basically resolved, right? And we can resolve those, and we can actually very easily do that when we work with our Akashic records and we go into that DNA, unpack the storyline, right? And I think your community knows about that because of your work and others like me, right? And that's the healer's journey, right? That's part of the healer's journey, that we do our ancestral clearing, and we do our, you know, our core work to heal and resolve whatever we're carrying. And simultaneously, though, as we do that, because they're not like, it doesn't have to be linear, we start unpacking what potential lies beyond those first two strands. And the more we unpack, the more we realize it's infinite, right? It's absolutely infinite. And the first earliest part of unpacking those strands beyond the first two is always like, yeah, our super psychic abilities, our superhuman abilities, our telepathic abilities, our empathic nature, our ability, yeah, to communicate with anything, anywhere, at any time, our ability to connect with source, then our ability to start accessing fields way beyond our physicality, right? Because obviously our physicality, you know, is surrounded in a sense by our emotionality, by our mental plane. And we realize these correlate to bandwidths and frequencies of consciousness, which we could call dimensions, dimensional states of being. So we need to clear all that stuff up so we can more and more unify with our multidimensional self, which goes way beyond mental and emotional and energetic and auric. Like, okay, our auric field brightens because that's our light field. We can go way beyond that. We can go to dimensions so far that we have never even known exist, where we become more at one with all that is. That's what's in those strands, really, our ability to harness things and aspects of ourselves that we're so astounded by. We're like, when I bring stuff through, when I've done like really good channeling or an amazing healing and some kind of miraculous something transforms for either a person or an animal, I'm like, what? That is so amazing, right? And I know it's not my personality self. It's these frequencies of light, sound, consciousness that I'm unifying with, that I'm able to bring through for the people and the animals I work with, right? And that expands their lives. We're not just talking about woo-woo fun here. We're talking about transforming our lives so that what happens is the world around us conforms for the new us who we are. And our lives, the quality of our lives, is what's improving. Because yeah, it's a lot of fun to do all of this, to, see all these lights and hear all these sounds and have visions from extraterrestrials talking to you and star family races, and to know that that's available to us, to know that we can live lives that are free from aging and illness and sickness and disease, and those potentials are waking up for us. That's all great. But what's really magnificent is bringing it into the physical world and watching the physical world transform to our liking. That more and more our experience is 100% positively moving in a direction that is of our enjoyment, of our happiness, of our health, where we get to contribute to the betterment of humanity and make a difference and feel good about it. We live in the eternal abundance of that source, where, yeah, miracles do show up. Like, people are miraculously healed of diseases, but not just, even more than that. It's like they even start to forget that they ever even had it, or that it was as bad as it was, or they start to so much more align with who they are now, that they're living in a whole new way. I'm living proof of this myself. So to me, that's what's in those strands. And I mean, we can go into the details of it, but really it's almost like, if we unpack the specifics of it, right? That stuff almost doesn't matter. What matters is how your life changes and how you reflect that into humanity. You start noticing, like, you can walk into a room full of shadow and not, when I say shadow, right, what the empaths, what we resist, like heavy, dense, doesn't feel good energy, and realize not only is it not affecting you, but you're the light that's cleaning it up. You can just go in there and clean up all the shadow around you that fast. It doesn't lower your vibration. You're not in resistance. You're not afraid anymore of those dark shadow things that could come after you. You don't have to keep cleaning up your field over and over again. You have to keep cutting cords over and over again. No, you still will. That's important. But you just know your light is so strong. Your vibration is so high. You're elevated at such a frequency that everybody else wants to be around you. And not only do they want to be around you, but they recognize, like, oh my God, that's good news right there. Like, I want to go wherever that good news is. That's what starts happening. And you're just so thrilled that you have the ability to do it. Saying you, but all of us. Yeah. But this information of this is stored in the DNA. So we can unpack it.
Yeah, that. I love how you described that, and just the sequence of events. It's very similar to my path, where I used to be kind of freaked out by the things that would show up in the night, which has been happening since my early childhood. And now I'm at that point where, it doesn't bother me, and it's just not a problem, because, I've done the work to get there. Yes. So along those lines, what are some, and I know this is part of what you teach, and you probably have whole courses around this, but what are some sort of key points that you could share to help people? Maybe somebody is afraid of, what's showing up, or can't handle the shadow when they walk into a room. What can they do?
Well, first of all, one of the core things I teach this in all my DNA activation calls, all my retreats, all my webinars, is how to get into the core of your being, which I don't really think most people really know how to do. And it's a very simple practice, but it's not something you learn in 5 minutes or 2 minutes. It requires at least a little bit of time, like a good meditation. But you got to know how to get into the core of your being, and you got to practice that on a regular and daily basis. You got to know how to open your core pillar, which is all your major chakra centers, right? All your major energy centers. You gotta know how to keep it open and flow energy through there. And you gotta know how to expand energy around you. That's not basic level stuff. It's very easy to learn, but it's not basic. It's advanced practice. Now, once you get into that and you're living in the core of your being, all this stuff in the quantum field, and by the way, I'd just like to say, the fourth dimensional construct, that's where ego sits, right? I don't really buy into the whole old paradigm ego. I don't buy into it at all. You get a fourth dimensional construct full of, like, the collective's thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, identifications, judgments, opinions, everything that's been non-physical floating around in there. Plus you got entities in there, demonics hang out in there. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? So in that field, and that's all just a bunch of inertia, just dense energy of gravity. You got to keep breaking through that. And you got to identify, like, that is not mine. That is just there. Stop identifying with the ego. That's old paradigm teaching. I completely, I just can't wait till that's not part of our reality anymore, because it keeps you stuck in a 3D world, keeps you trapped, and it keeps you small and locked in. So you have to be able to pass through the density of our fourth dimensional reality. And the only way you can do that, in my opinion, is to know how to become neutral. You have to become neutral and neutralize those parts of yourself that are stuck and or engaging in the judgment, the fear, the anxiety, the entangled thoughts, the monkey mind. Like, all that stuff is fourth dimensional density, inertia. So the practice of getting in the core of the being, the practice of clearing out the core pillar, the practice of flowing energy, expanding energy, those are practices for people who really want to accelerate their journey and progress. That's one of the major ones. Activating the DNA, no question. Continually activating and awakening DNA, no question, is a major part of it, because you're awakening your potential that's stored up in that DNA, some of which is just uncoded entirely, ready for you to decide, this code I'm going to put there. I'm going to bring this in. This, we talk about a code. Maybe it's a template for how to operate. Maybe it's a code of, you know, of all these new gifts, talents, abilities, right? Whatever it is. So you get to work with your DNA. That's the second piece. And the third thing I would say, on an ongoing basis, besides, you know, core of the being, expanding your light body, learning how to do that, keeping the core pillar open, is learning neutrality and non-resistance, right? So your first one is that. Second thing, DNA and neutrality, non-resistance, because there's still a ton of resistance in the light worker community. It is amazing to me how many light workers are still in so much resistance to anything that they judge as bad or wrong or dark or shadow. They don't want to hear about conspiracy. They don't want to hear about negative aliens. They won't hear about false governments. They like these things. So that puts you in duality. If you're only willing to look at the light, then you are doing yourself a massive disservice. That puts you in a state of duality. Every time you resist, judge, or condemn, or wrong, or sweep something under a carpet, that's your shadow keeping you in the density. That's inertia. And so the goal of becoming neutral never means you don't care. That's the great misunderstanding about that. It means that you understand that part of that physical world that we're all breaking free from, where duality is the game, right? Duality is the great construct, requires us to recognize that in that construct there is dark, there is light, there is evil, there is good, and ultimately it is all love. But in order for us to align with that love, we must love, accept, and embrace, and recognize all of it as part of the game of duality that we've been experiencing. So those are my three things. I will add one more fourth thing to your most excellent question. And it kept coming and going, and now it's gone again, but it was a biggie. Oh, darn. It slipped my mind, but it's such a big one.
Okay, maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, anyway.
Well, I just want to comment on what you just said, because that's so important, to be able to hold the shadow and the light simultaneously. That I feel like is really the enlightened, like the mastership, is to be able to hold both without getting attached to things being a certain way. Yes, I see that things can be dark, and I see that there's this light, and I don't need to only be in one or the other, or, you know, if I acknowledge one, it doesn't mean that the other one's not there. That's really like walking the edge of the sword in a sense, and yet to hold both and then make your choice in how you're going to live your life.
Totally,
that's mastership.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that when you really start dedicating yourself, as I know I have, to my purpose for me is in aligning my purpose with whatever the will of the divine is. So in doing that, I affirm on a daily basis, I'm here to serve the light. My mission and purpose is to be aligned with God's will for me. And my plan, in God's plan for me, in God's role, or in my role in God's plan of light of creation. Like I say it every day, over and over again, all the time. What is God's role for me? What is my role in God's plan of light of creation? Let me align with that. I align myself with God's will for me and God's plan for me in God's plan of light of creation. And so then it doesn't matter like what shadow comes up or what's going on. I'm just always asking, what is the role of the light in this? What is the role of the light? What is my role in God's plan? So whatever happens, like even when you start looking at the shadow things, a lot of times, even with like a lot of the channeling, and then I remember the fourth thing is to embrace, just if you say that word, I'll remember. But the whole thing is like a lot of times sources like this has to play out to help humanity. Like when the COVID thing was happening and we were all in such like, how did this happen? And the big message was this has to play out. This is part of God's plan for light of creation to help humans to make free will choice about where they're going and what they're doing, all kinds of things. Same with a lot of what happens on earth that we see as wrong or bad is part of how humanity is being given a choice to see things with absolute clarity, to not let them be blindsided by things anymore. So sometimes things seem quite obvious to us because we're at the higher frequencies and we can see things that maybe in the denser realms they can't see, but through the experience, they're really learning to make change. So, you know, a lot of times that's the case and we can sit and judge like, oh, that's wrong. But if it's part of God's plan to assist humanity to make better choices and to change their ways, then who am I to judge what God's plan is, right? And how it's served. Anyway, I'll say the fourth thing. Is that okay? Sure. So the fourth thing is to learn how to embrace, to welcome home any form of fear and anything that encompasses resistance of any kind through the embracing and the welcoming at home to love, the love that you are, that we are, through the breath of love and the recognition that all shadow is seeking light, which is love. When we learn how to cultivate that ability, again, very simple practice, not learnable in 4 minutes, but learnable in less than an hour. Very simple practice. When we learn how to really embrace, nothing can get us. Nothing.
Yeah.
That is part of embracing that shadow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Thank you for those tips. And time flies when you're having fun, right? So I want to make sure we share about your gift, and your offers. You have a gift called Unlocking Your Dormant DNA MP3 class. Actually, there's a whole bunch here. Why don't you tell us about? I'm like,
yeah,
wow, there's like 6 things on this page.
Yeah, the DNA class, it's a class and it's also an actual activation. And you learn about how and why we activate. It's, why do we activate our DNA? How do we do it? How is it done? And you get a free activation in there too. And that free gift, do you want me to say the link or you just put it in there?
I will. You can say it. I'll include it in the show notes. Feel free to say it.
Yeah, so that's at lorispagna.com/free gifts/DNA. And then for people who want to learn more about working with animals and how to help animals on a global scale, this is for the animal lovers who really want to make a difference. It's lorispagna.com/free gifts/animals. And this is content rich stuff. This is not just like a little silly PDF. This is really good stuff and multiple like classes and energy work on that. And then there's another one, the crystals that you need to have, what crystals you need to have so that you can work through using the crystals and the crystalline consciousness for ascension. That's another amazing, the crystalline realm for tools of ascension and healing and DNA activation and Akashic records reading. Amazing, right? That's it's a class and a meditation. That's lorispagna.com/free gifts/crystals. And then the other free one is the starseed one. If you want to know more about your starseed roots, your starseed connection, and how to tap into the Indigo family tribes, right? We're all members of the Indigo family tribes. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to lorispagna.com/free gifts/starseed. Yeah, those are the free ones.
Yeah, thank you for that. What a generous package of gifts you've got for us. So thank you for all of that. And you also have your offer is an annual membership. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff here too. I'll just let you
Yeah.
talk about it. There's a whole bunch going on.
That membership is the annual DNA activations package. So what that has is, it has DNA activations going back to, yeah, I've been doing them since 2011, I think, or 2011 is when I started doing DNA activations. And over the years, they've evolved. So this package goes back, I think, to 2016 when I started getting into the codes, the codons, the templates, and it gets really specific on some of the unconscious codes that have been, in the corrupted DNA. It cleans that stuff out, which we didn't get too much to talk about that, but it's the stuff that, lingers in the fields of like lack, limitation, suffering, pain, sickness, illness, disease, aging. Like it says first, the corrupted DNA, the stories of our ancestors. So it gets into clearing that stuff out, and it also gets into activating all the codes and codons and sacred star code markings of what humans are evolving into as we evolve into, Homo divinicus or Homo luminous, right? That's the future, of the evolutionary path. So it starts activating all those. There's hundreds of activations in there, and there's meditations that will teach people really these things we're talking about, getting into the core of their being, clearing out their core pillar, accessing and awakening, opening their base chakra, opening their crown chakra so they become a pillar for the divine. The most recent one we just did, how to build pillars of hope for humanity, and in your own home, in your own house, in your own energy field, pillars of divine inspiration. It's so progressed, that package, and yet it's very easy to move through because it's videos and MP3 recordings and meditations that really help you to work with your DNA, activate your sacred key codes, star code markings, and the divine templates and virtues. Because again, we need to develop this. I'll just say one more piece on this, is that the evolution of Gaia Sophia, Earth, is underway. She is evolving. We get to stay or leave. How we choose to navigate is up to us. Leaving means essentially, I'm going to ascend in the non-physical. Staying means I'm going to ascend on Earth in physical. And that means we have to change. We have to re-engineer our own bodies, the light that we hold, the frequency, the vibration, who we are, how we behave, how we exist. That is required. That is required for us as we evolve and ascend, because Earth, she's moving on, and she's not willing to have us anymore if we're going to be causing harm and detriment to her or to one another or to ourselves. So this is part of this change. This is why we do this work with this DNA. So that's what that package is. It's hundreds of activations. It is literally tons of meditations. It's a living library, so it does get updated annually. And and that's available today. Oh, isn't there a code, a coupon code? Yes, there is.
Yes. So not only did you have the value is $22.22, the regular price you're selling it for is $444, but you're giving a coupon code, WAX, all capitals, to save an additional 25% off, which is $111, which will make it $333.
Yes, and that's only, that's like your code. So that is not I won't be publicizing that. It's not available anywhere else. So
that's an incredible deal for so much. I mean, just so much. You give a ton of value, Lori. Thank you for that.
I have always prided myself on, I do believe in, over delivering. And I do love that. I think the joy of life really does come through giving and being of service, So I want to make this available. It's very progressed information, and yet an energy, and yet very easy to integrate and to put into practice for self. So
that's one of the things I love about the way that you share. It's, there are some lofty concepts and ideas, and yet you make them very assimilable and accessible so that you don't have to be, some sort of genius to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, it's very grounded. These practices are very easy to learn and to apply. They don't take a long time, and they are, again, transformational. So I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. It's very exciting to see humanity waking up, even though these are extremely challenging times, because again, they're literally cajoling us, forcing us to make a choice about where we're going and where we're becoming. And I have every certainty that the beings of light, the people who choose the light and align with an ascension journey, will continue to evolve well into the future, because that's who our star family races are. Yeah. It's us in the future. So I know that Earth continues to thrive and we thrive, but we are required to make these changes. So anyway, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of this powerful information, for your generosity, for your gifts and offer, and just for you. I appreciate you so much, Lori. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's been really a pleasure and an honor. You're absolutely so lovely. You can always tell when you're in the presence of light. It's amplified.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in. I will include all of Lori's links in the show notes, so be sure and grab all of those wonderful free gifts and the offers that's speaking to you. Have a wonderful day or evening. Namaste.